Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Ryan Holiday with us. Ryan, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Ryan, for the people that don't know, you're the Director of Marketing for American Apparel, a little company they might have heard of. You're the best-selling author of Trust Me, I'm Lying. You've also marketed other books to become bestsellers, and without you, they may not have been. I'll leave it at that for now. And you also have a new book out called Growth Hacker Marketing, which is really the first, I think, book on growth hacking put out by a major publisher. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. That was the goal with writing it for sure.
Yeah, it came out just a few days ago. I got to read through a lot of it. It's a great kind of primer on the topic, but we'll talk about more of that. But first, I want to know, what was your first exposure to the notion of growth hacking? How did it get on your radar? Because you're a really successful kind of marketer, traditional marketer. Where did you learn about growth hacking from?
Yeah, so a few years ago, a friend of mine introduced me to two writers, Andrew Chen and Jesse Farmer. Jesse doesn't write as much anymore, but he has a great site called 20 Bits. Andrew Chen, I think it's just andrewchen.com or .co or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I was reading, I'd been reading their stuff for a number of years. It was always very well written and very interesting, but it was sort of about like stuff that had nothing to do with me. Because I'm the director of marketing at American Apparel. It's not a traditional company, but it's old school traditional marketing, like fashion magazines, parties, samples, that sort of stuff. And so I read it. It was always interesting. It was just like keeping up on what's going on. And then one day I went in the office and Andrew had a new essay, and it was called Growth Hackers Are the New VPs of Marketing. Uh-huh. And it was the first one. It was the first article that he'd written that sort of like really stopped me cold, because it was like I was who he was talking about. Like I was that VP of marketing. And when you read something like that first, you're like, oh, this is for everyone but me. This doesn't count. And as I'm reading this article, it just sort of rocked my very foundations as a marketer, because it was saying all the things that I'd spent a number of years trying to get really good at were totally irrelevant and had not at all been used to build this group of billion-dollar brands right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And that's what really drew me down the rabbit hole of growth hacking, and then and ultimately culminated in the book.
Yeah, that's great. And a lot of the people we have on the show, they kind of start from the analytics side of thing, the data side of thing, and then they arrive at growth hacking. A lot of them are engineers. You've kind of come from the other side of the spectrum, from the marketing side. So that's why I really want to kind of shape this interview around that perspective, because you're going to have views that other people just don't have access to right now. So let's talk about how growth hacking kind of relates to traditional marketing. What do you see as maybe the similarities and the differences of the two worlds?
Yeah, so I think the biggest similarity is that marketing tends to be something that someone else does for you. So even at American Apparel, it's like there's all the people that are making all the stuff, there's the creative people, and then when it's ready to be marketed, it gets passed to us. Or when I represent clients, their thing is done, and now they're ready to start thinking about marketing. Mm-hmm. And growth hacking, from my research and my understanding, what I think initially drew me to it and I found so attractive is that distinction doesn't exist. There's not a marketing department at these companies. There is just the company, and they're making things, and it's almost because they don't like marketing. They're trying to think of ways that they can early on make it less and less necessary. Uh-huh. And as a marketer, I personally found that it's like, sometimes my job would be really easy, and sometimes it would be really hard. And the only difference would be the quality of the product and its fit with what people actually wanted or were willing to talk about. So It's like I sort of when I read what product market fit was for the first time, I instantly knew that I'd known about it for a long time, because that was the difference between these projects that would blow up with a little bit of marketing work versus these ones that I would have to pitch and and never get traction. And so I think marketers intuitively understand the concept of growth hacking, and perhaps why it's so attractive is that it instead of just hoping that you get good things, a growth hacker says, well, I can be involved and I can actually build the marketing into the product itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you see any similarities between the two worlds? Because it's very fashionable to talk about the differences. Everybody wants to talk about how they're different. Do they have any similar goals in your mind?
Well, I think they definitely have similar goals, which is to, like bring customers in, obviously. I think the problem is that marketing sometimes thinks that marketing is in and of itself a goal. So you want to get attention or you want to get awareness, whereas a growth hacker says those are means to an end. Marketing, because it's 100+ years old, the sort of modern marketing industry, it's become good for its own sake, and that's where things like vanity metrics come in. So I think, yes, at their core, they're identical, but it's that one has a lot of baggage and assumptions and history that can often get in the way of what the true goal is, which is, growing the product.
Yeah.
No one's spending money on marketing to not grow their product.
Yeah. The goals are the same. The means are very different. Let me ask you this. Is there anything that a marketer can learn from a growth hacker without necessarily becoming one? I don't know if that question even makes sense, but is there anything they can take away from this discussion as a marketer?
Yeah, of course. Look, if you're in the marketing department at Visa, I don't think you throw out everything and just become a growth hacker, because there's a lot of what you do that institutionally is important for your job. So put aside whether that's good or bad. It's just look, marketing is what it is, and sometimes that's your job. But I think what I like about growth hacking is that it seems to me that it was invented to exist right now. Whereas a lot of what we do in marketing was, for instance, the press release was invented around World War I based on the media environment and sort of population concerns at that time. It was okay, how do we communicate to these growing population? We'll write a release and we'll give it to the media, and then it'll get printed essentially as it is, and we'll reach millions of people. So that's great, and it worked really well, and that's why Edward Bernays and people like that became very famous. But today we're still writing press releases, even though we live in a drastically different media environment. And so what I like about growth hacking, and I think what we can learn at its core, is people who didn't see themselves as marketers were trying to do marketing and trying to essentially invent, not knowing what they were doing, had to invent it again. Almost like how you'll hear about languages, like sign language has independently been developed in a few different isolated places, and it's very similar. Those languages are very similar but distinct. And growth hacking is marketing reinvented in the 2000s for the media environment and the world of the 2000s. And I think that's where the real lessons are.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like the way you see that. Now, let me ask you kind of a controversial question, at least for this audience. What can growth hackers learn from the more traditional marketers? Because a lot of times they want to downplay the past. Maybe they should. I don't know. What do you think? Is there something to learn there?
Look, there's obviously a lot to learn. And I think some of the political and institutional concerns are some of that too, where it's when growth hackers are talking about how they do all these things without spending money, and then it's okay, but you're also running companies that have revenues that are a fraction of the size of your small of these big companies. So it's if you're the idea of building a brand is important. I think David Ogilvy was saying, he's look, when products get more and more similar, when the distinct differences between products are less, that's when marketing and branding becomes valuable. And so it's growth hacking makes sense, especially when you're inventing something totally new. But as your marketplace gets more crowded, you have to understand some of these things like branding. So it's what's the difference between one insurance company and another? It's not much. And that's when things like branding come into play. So I think these big companies have gotten good at understanding that, and the things that they do, albeit more expensive, address those concerns. And I think growth hackers, if you're starting a startup tomorrow, maybe you don't need to worry about that. But if you're at the growth team at Facebook, which is now a $1 billion, almost blue chip company, you're going to have to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah. And do you think that the future companies that are successful will essentially do both? They're going to have marketing, they're going to have branding, they're going to have all the press releases and PR like normal, but then they'll also have teams and people dedicated to growth hacking. Do you kind of see it being that way?
Yeah, totally. It's look, I think in 2009 or 2010, Facebook's advertising budget was $8 million. It's going to be $100 million this year. people don't understand how tough it is to spend $100 million. Like at some point, like that's all of like that's so many billions of online ad impressions that you have to start doing things like parties and celebrities and stuff like that. And so I think that the digital scalable stuff is certainly going to continue as it is. And then as these brands, you know, like let's say tomorrow there was a PR crisis at Facebook, you're not going to be able to growth hack your way out of that. That's good. You're going to need to utilize media channels and sort of start to tell your media narrative somewhat differently. And that's going to be a skill that growth hackers are going to want to look to traditional marketers for, to understand why and how those skills exist, but then hopefully come up with new and better ways to do it without the baggage and bloated, you know, history that a lot of that has as well.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the book a little bit. It's a short book. It gives you kind of the 4 phases of growth hacking based on your research, and it really sums it up nicely. I want to talk through each phase of the book. The first one is, you mentioned it already, product market fit. So how do you define product market fit? And then also, why is that the first step? Why is it so fundamental to everything else?
Yeah, so what I tried to do in the book too is I was reading all this stuff about growth hacking, and I found that it was very hard to get introduced to it. So it's like you hear that growth hacking is important and then you should know about it, and then all the stuff is about technically how to implement growth hacking, which is great. But if you're working at a Fortune 500 company and you're trying to figure it out, you don't have an opportunity to implement it this way. So I wanted to sort of go through the mindset more than the toolkit, which I think is Aaron Jen's line. But the first part is the most crucial part, which is, you know, you have to make stuff that people want, and you have to make it in a way that's conducive to what those needs and wants are. And so I think product market fit comes before everything. This isn't like a new thought or anything, but it's like people think about marketing first, or they think about it last, when really they should think about it concurrently with what they're doing. So it's like, I've got this really good idea, or so I think. Now I should test that idea and make it the best and most spreadable and shareable version of that idea. And ideally I should do it, I think, in a small iterative way. So like, I like the example of Instagram, which started as a geolocation social network. If Instagram had started with a $10 million advertising campaign, if Instagram had launched bourbon with a $10 million advertising campaign, there's no way they would have pivoted and become a totally different company and made literally billions of dollars, because the cognitive dissonance would have been too high, the sunk cost fallacy would be there. It would have been too much to change. But because they started small and they brought in a few thousand customers instead of 1 million customers, they were able to actually respond to that feedback. And then when you look at these growth hacking startups, I think at their core, it's not the growth hacking that made them successful. It was that they were an amazing product for a group of people who don't normally get amazing products. And that's why they were so explosive. The rest is just, directing that explosion in the right way.
Absolutely. One of the ways I've thought about it is product market fit. It's a necessary condition for growth, but maybe not sufficient. There's a lot of things that are good products that don't grow, but you can't grow without a good product.
No, totally. You can't. The best marketer in the world, like, people look at me and they're like, oh, you've done these best-selling books. Can you make my book a bestseller? And it's like, only if you've written a potential bestseller, then I can help make that happen.
Yeah, that's a great way to sum it up. And then the second thing after product market fit is what you call finding your growth hack. So what kinds of growth hacks are we talking about here? What are some of the ones maybe you mentioned in your book?
Yeah. So what I like about growth hackers too is like, so a marketer says like, okay, how can we get customers? And the answers are press releases, advertisements, like publicity, and like a launch party. And that's it. Like those are the only ways we're allowed to get customers. The growth hacker is like, okay, we just got to get customers. Like, we got to get a couple thousand people, and it doesn't matter if I have to call them all individually and invite them myself. Like a growth hacker says, like, growth matters, or growth is the end, and growth is, and whatever the means are, we don't care. And so that's what I really like about growth hacking. But I think some of the most compelling examples were not found by me, but they're great. You know, or PayPal building itself on eBay, Airbnb building itself on Craigslist. I think what a growth hacker does is it finds a platform that's underutilized or underexploited, and then it designs itself around benefiting from the latent power of that platform. Upworthy, blowing up by taking advantage of the Facebook feed is another great example. It's just anyone who sees like, hey, people aren't taking full advantage of this new thing yet. Let's do that. To me, that's growth hacking. And I think it's one problem with growth hacking, though, is people tend to look at those examples and they see those examples as being things you should emulate rather than being like boxes that have been checked and therefore are not available to you anymore. Like if I was launching a website, I wouldn't try to use the Facebook feed because BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and Upworthy have already dominated that space. I'm going to go try to find something else.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you said, the Aaron Jen quote, that it's a mindset, not just a tactic. Because when it's a mindset, you can see the boxes checked, but the mindset is going to find the box that's not checked.
Right. It's like, okay, you guys found these platforms and got millions of users from it. What's my platform? And what am I going to, and how are we going to fully take advantage of that? And when you do it, you see that it's super powerful. And that's, so I think that's probably the second most important step.
Yeah. And in your research, have you found that there's usually one hack that kind of unlocks the mass of the users? Or is it really a combination of different hacks that these companies kind of string together?
You know what I think? I think it's both. Certainly, by the way, another great example, it doesn't always have to be a platform. Facebook deciding that we're going to use colleges who are, a contained under served audience. We're going to design something just for them. That's going to blow up.
Yeah.
But so for Facebook, that's their first growth hack. And then the next one, they're looking for something else. You know, a growth team isn't just doing one thing over and over and over again. It's like once Airbnb starts to exploit Craigslist, that the diminishing returns at some point set in, and then they've got to find the next thing.
Yeah.
Although, ideally, this leads into the next step, which I'm sure we'll get to. It's that your growth hack is to bring the initial rush of users in, which is setting you up for what you're going to do next. It's not like repeat step 2 ad nauseum.
Gotcha. All right, so the next step is going viral, kind of leveraging that initial user base. So what do you mean by going viral, and how is that done in your research?
Yeah, so I guess first I mean it not in the way that every traditional marketer has ever heard it, which is like you're in a meeting and some boring person who totally sucks says like, hey, we want this to go viral. Like, I want this video to go viral. And you're just like, did you watch the video? This is not something that anyone would share. Like, you're going to put this on your personal Facebook. Your 20 friends are going to say they like it, and then no one else is going to watch it. So virality is something that has to be built into the product. And this works in lockstep with step 2, which is, okay, so you're bringing in a rush of people. If those people are not encouraged to bring in more people, then you're going to have to repeat step 2 to bring in a constant flow of new users. If you make something amazing, you find a way to get people to spread the word, and then when those people are sucked in, the network effect kicks in. They're encouraged to invite other people. By using the product, it's inherently social and public. Now you're getting free, like if you bring in 10,000 users taking advantage of some growth hack, and those 10,000 users are publicly interacting with your service, now you've reached millions of people.
Yeah. And then that kind of leads to the fourth step, which is retention and optimization. You got them, you don't want to lose them, right?
Yeah, and I quote you in the book, which is that retention trumps acquisition. So it's like, if you don't want to get stuck repeating step 2 over and over again, you better make sure that the people that you're bringing in and the people that are finding out about your service virally are actually sticking and being turned into long-time customers. So I think it was Archie Adams, who's a growth hacker at Udemy.
Yeah, Archie Abrams, yeah.
Abrams, yeah. He put it well. He's like, look, you don't have to bring in more customers. You can just increase the long-term value of your customers, and it accomplishes the same thing. And I think any marketer can tell you or any product development person can tell you, acquisition is very expensive. Having to go out and market costs money, and it takes time and whatever. You would be better spending your time talking to the people. It's easier to preach to the converted, and if you spend your time there, I think you're going to get better results.
Yeah, if they got that far down your funnel already, they're drawn to you in a way that a random visitor isn't. They've already self-qualified that they want to be sold to more, so sell to them more.
Right, exactly. And you're also learning from those people what's wrong with your product, where they're leaking out. I think the Twitter suggested users list is a great example of a sort of a retention innovation that actually had major marketing implications.
Yeah.
Would Ashton Kutcher have gotten the first 1 million Twitter followers if the suggested users list wasn't there? No, of course not. But that came about because they were trying to fix a hole where users were leaking out. And so, I think a traditional marketer wouldn't have seen that as a marketing choice, but Josh Ellman was smart enough to see that, hey, not only will this will help us grow and is therefore marketing.
Yeah. Now, your book that you just released with Penguin, it's an ebook, and it's already a bestseller on Amazon. It's only been out a few days. And again, I don't think it's an accident. Growth hacking usually isn't an accident. There's usually, a little chemistry experiment going on behind the scenes, kind of a network of things you're trying to make that happen. And as I looked at the cells of it, because I'm always watching what's going on with growth hacking, I saw a few of the things you were doing, right? Behind the scenes, some of the strings you were pulling. So I want you to talk to us about those things, because this is your territory. You understand how to push a book. That's what you know.
Yeah, it's funny. So with both my last two books, with Trust Me, I'm Lying, I remember sitting down with the publisher and I was like, look, I wrote a book about how I manipulate the media and I'm good at marketing. If this book's not a bestseller, it sort of undermines the argument. And that's actually my main problem with most marketing books. They're well written, but it's like, if this guy's so good, why is he writing a book? And why is it not more successful? And so I wanted to make sure with this book that if I'm going to write about growth hacking and how I sort of have discovered and learned about growth hacking, I better put those principles into effect, or at least try to.
Yeah.
So I did that in a number of ways. The biggest one was I wrote an ebook instead of a physical book, which meant I got it to market faster. I can change and improve it and make it better. I can add stuff to
Product market fit right there.
Yeah, exactly. And then price too. I probably could have sold this book for a lot more, but I put it up for $3, which I actually contractually negotiated with my publisher because I wanted people to be able to take a chance on it. That's a big part. It's like, hey, I heard this book was good, but I don't want to spend $30 because I might be wrong, So those were the big things I did. But then I understood I wanted to try sort of a content marketing approach. So I think I wrote something like 15 different articles about things that were in the book that I published for free all over the internet. Because the best way to bring people in is to use someone else's platform and offer them something for free. And that ended up being a big driver of sales. So I did 3 SlideShare presentations, for example, and I think cumulatively they're at almost 400,000 views.
Wow.
And those are 400,000 people who wouldn't have just picked up the book based on the strength of my name or something.
Yeah.
So one, they're more likely to buy the book, but even if they don't buy the book, they've at least heard of it and they know about me, and maybe they'll buy something from me down the road.
Yeah. And when you did those guest blogging articles, one of the things I noticed is, because that's one of my strategies, I guest blog, I try to get traffic at the top of the funnel that way, and you orchestrated it so that they were all published almost at the same time. So I know you weren't one-offing these, like, I'm going to write it, pitch it, get it out there, write it, pitch it, get it out there. There was some kind of machinery where these were already pre-written, right? Ready to go. Yeah,
of course. So, I finished the book, I think, in January or February, and then I spent the rest of the time planning out my marketing strategy, writing articles, building relationships, connecting with people. And so I wrote all the articles, and then I said, hey, look, I'm not telling you when you can and can't publish them, but this is when it comes out. I would like it to be as close to that as possible, because books, especially with Amazon, their success is measured by velocity. So, if and I found that pre-orders are harder to convince people to do. So I wanted them all to come out when the book was available and to drive sales. And that's what drove it to number one. And that's how you get that cumulative advantage, because people are like, man, this book came out of nowhere. I'm seeing it all over the place. It must be at least worth investigating a little bit further.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of authors, they concentrate everything in the first week and then they have nothing left. This is an ebook. It has a longer lifespan, hopefully. So I've still got 3 or 4 more articles coming this week. I'm doing this interview with you.
Yeah.
I think you've got to have velocity, but if you pop up and then immediately fall back down, that's not productive either.
Yeah. No, well, let's actually talk about velocity for just a second, because I think there's something deeper there beyond just books. It's obvious for books, because Amazon, literally, you can't be a bestseller unless in week 1 you have X number of sales. But there's something you said about, when it seems like you're everywhere, that can also work in a startup. If all of a sudden a startup is just everywhere, they're ubiquitous, everywhere you turn, they're being talked about, they have a dominance in your mind that is hard to replicate. But then, like you said, they also need the volume. So I want startups to hear you need velocity and volume for your product and for a book, and they're both just, principles to take away.
Yeah, I sort of think about it as like a well-timed artillery barrage. It's like it's all aimed at the same thing, but it's much more powerful if it's coming in all directions.
Yeah.
So there's that old marketing adage, like you need to reach people you need to touch people 3 different times before they're going to try your product. Well, the problem is, that was when we all consumed 3 or 4 different mediums. A lot of people I know, it's like they go on the internet, they listen to Spotify on their computer, they check apps on their phone. It's like it's all the same digital stuff. And so I feel like the barrage has to be much bigger, because I think I did a couple of mostly in the UK, I did a couple print interviews, but it's like this is all digital. So it's got to be much bigger, and it's like you got to know where people's radar, what's on people's radar. And then if you can register on that radar a bunch of times in a small window, it feels like, okay, this is a big deal. This is one of those things I should check out.
Yeah, it's interesting you call it an artillery barrage, because I actually did a class for Udemy on this, and I called it hype bomb.
Nice, yeah.
Because you're trying to create a bomb of hype in a very short amount of time, and it can't have these effects as long as you have the volume to carry it forward, or you don't have the trowel of sorrow they talk about, where everything went into the PR release and then you got nothing left. So I love the way you're thinking about it. That's great. Well, Ryan, this is
digital.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. And the thing about digital, what is good about them is when you time it as an artillery barrage. But if someone doesn't get around to reading, some blog post I wrote on Thought Catalog for 6 months, the link still works. It's still good. You appear on the Today Show, no one's watching the archives of the Today Show. So the digital stuff, it doesn't really matter when you publish it. So you might as well publish it all at the same time. And if you do it right, though, you should be making evergreen stuff that should, I'm hoping now a lot of these posts will be like the number 1 and 2 and 3 sort of Google results for growth hacking and continue to drive traffic indefinitely.
Yeah. And one of the threads that kind of runs through everything we've talked about in terms of gaining momentum is leveraging other people's audiences, LOPA, because that's what we talked about, when Facebook leverages campuses. The campus was somebody else's audience and they leveraged it. When someone like Spotify leverages Facebook, that's someone else's audience they're leveraging. When you hijack 15 blogs, you've leveraged someone else's audience. They've already captured a group of people. How can you tap into them, get all the eyeballs on you, and run for it?
And I think that the number one principle behind that, and people forget, is self-interest. And this is one, so I trained under Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, and he says, never appeal to mercy or gratitude, always self-interest. It's I think the most important law of power. And so it's like, if you want a blog post, you don't go hey, I'm trying to promote my book, will you let me write a blog post? It's like, look, growth hacking is this big thing. I think this post will do really well. I'm going to promote the shit out of it. Will you let me write this? It will be good for you. Yep. And incidentally, also good for me. Yep. And people, TechCrunch doesn't exist to promote your startup. That's not why they exist. But they do exist to generate page views. And if promoting your startup gets them page views, those goals are in sync and you'll be able to benefit from their platform.
Absolutely. Whenever I write a guest blog post, one of the first things I say in the email is, hey, my last one had over 800 retweets. That's
Right.
3 times more than your average post. Can I write a guest post for you?
Right, exactly. And so like you want to make sure that you're not being super transactional about it, but you want to hint at that ever so subtly that's like, look, pretend like you're doing me a favor when really you're doing yourself a favor.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Ryan, this has been a great interview. You've been super transparent. I'm glad you've done all the research you have as an outsider to kind of shed a light on it in a new way for insiders. I think it's so helpful, you putting out a book on it. And I think it even validates the space. When Penguin puts out a book by Ryan Holiday on the topic that I'm personally very interested in, it validates the space for a lot of people. So thank you for all your work, first of all.
No, of course, and thank you. You know, like for people who don't know, like you and I talked like while I was writing the book. You gave me a bunch of great insight, and you actually helped me. You threw out this idea that I should give like a trial subscription to Growth Hacker TV at the back of the book, and it only occurred to me then that that would be a great way to capture email addresses and sort of like, so if I decided to do a print version, I have all the people who signed up to get the bonuses that I gave away. And so, like, you were very helpful in sort of helping me not just – I think I understood growth hacking as a mindset, and then you gave me this great tactic that I think also illustrates the mindset.
Well, and then you added to it, because when I got to the back of the book, you also put in there, and if you send me your email or whatever, then I'll also send you transcripts of the interviews I did. And now all of a sudden I'm like, well, now I want to give him my email address. And, you know, the thing was based on what me and him talked about. So you took it up a level, and I think that's a great way to think about it, because it's a traditional product. It's a book. And yet it's being growth hacked, and you're building a mailing list. And I'm sure Penguin has never done anything like that before.
No, of course not. Like, you sell thousands of copies of a book, and then you do another book with them, and you have to start completely from scratch. It's insane. Like, authors who sell millions of books are in that same boat. It's actually, you know, quite sad in some ways. But from your idea, I just decided it's like, look, if I can produce an overwhelming amount of value for people, they're going to be a lot more likely to recommend the book. And I felt like that was its own growth hack. And I've seen people talking about this on Twitter. They're like, look, the book is $3, but then I got, you know, hundreds of dollars worth of bonuses. You've got to buy this thing. And it's like, the things were free for me to give away, and it works out. And I think at the end of the day, if growth hacking and marketing come together in any way, it's when you make something that's spectacular and worth talking about, that's the ultimate growth hack, and it checks off all the steps that we talked about.
Yeah, and it even shows the ability of partnerships, because as much as you're growth hacking with me, I'm growth hacking with you. You know, so I'm getting new users every day signing up, putting in a credit card on Growth Hacker TV because of your book. You're getting people buying the book because they get, you know, a lot of money free in Growth Hacker TV and other things.
Totally.
So growth hacking is not a zero-sum game. Everyone's not your enemy. A lot of times, if you join forces, you can go and take market share together, and it's just not zero-sum.
Absolutely. That's probably the best thing that I've heard about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on here and just being a part of Growth Hacker TV.
Awesome. Can't wait to see this.